through how to build a great product while balancing a million demands. We're going to be covering how to balance user needs with corporate and functional demands, and kind of talking about just how to ensure that you're building the right things and maintaining product continuity while just juggling the millions of competing requests from whether it's from your product team or customers. And today we're joined by Kirsten Butzo. She is a speaker and instructor at Pragmatic Marketing and has more than 20 years experience working with technology companies. And then we're also joined by Cassidy Fine. She's a product manager for Echo360, and Heysoos Ramirez. He is a partner and VP of product at Tallwave and also an advisor for Tallwave Capital. So I just kind of gave a brief overview of each of these fabulous folks, but wanted to have you give a little bit more background on kind of your experience in product management.
Thanks, Beth. I appreciate that. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kirsten Butzo, and I am an instructor with Pragmatic Marketing. I've been doing technology product management and marketing for the last 20 years. I have a marketing degree. I have my MBA, and I've kind of done everything, starting out as a product specialist, working my way up to executive roles with anywhere from small startups to billion-dollar companies. So excited to be here with you today.
And Cassidy, can you give us a little more background on yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Cassidy Fine. I'm the product manager at Echo360. I've been in SaaS for about 6 years now, mostly B2B companies. Is kind of what I love the most. Also smaller to medium-sized companies. And before this, I was at NewsGrid, which is a content marketing SaaS solution.
And Heysoos?
Yeah, so my name is Heysoos Ramirez. As Beth mentioned, I'm the VP of Product at Tallwave, also an advisor for Tallwave Capital. I've spent about 10 years in product management roles, leading product development teams. My background is in product design, so I went to Stanford design school or product design school, got my degree there, and have held roles at a couple of different companies. First one was Zazzle, so product manager, did product marketing and product management at Zazzle, and then was product manager for a healthcare startup called Dr. First. I've also advised dozens of other startups on everything from customer development, launching products, developing their go-to-market strategies, their growth plans, and then also building teams.
Wonderful. So guess we'll just dive right in with the first question. And I wanted to have you kind of, I'll direct this towards you, Heysoos, but what are some ways to really drive alignment internally?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll kick it off. So, anybody can jump in, but, one clear way of driving alignment is to have a clear understanding of and prioritization of customer needs. So I think that's like pretty simple way of saying it, but there is no single way of doing this. But I think a few things are pretty critical. I've found that open dialogue with key stakeholders is pretty important. It's amazing what you can accomplish and the consensus you can drive by just locking people in a room for a couple of hours and making sure that nobody leaves until you drive alignment and agreement on what's most important. And then making sure that you document it and notarize it before you leave, right? Like making sure that everybody understands that was committed to as you're leaving. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is that engaging customers early. So, a lot of people think that you can't engage customers until you have a product to actually test with them, but I actually prefer to start informing the priority of what you're going to build and the needs that you're going to solve for really, really early on with customers, even before you have a product or even your design team or development team has started to work on anything. The product manager can do that on their own. And so engaging customers early to drive that alignment, I think is really important.
And Kirsten, anything?
Yeah, I definitely, just to build on what Heysoos said, I completely agree that it really starts with an understanding of your market. So who are your buyers? Who are your users? What are the problems that they have that you're trying to solve for them? And if you can really get clarity and focus around the specifics of the problem that you're trying to solve, everything else you do really should fall in place behind that. And it really has the potential to take that horse trading component out of negotiating inside the organization, what the priorities should be, because instead of relying on each other to set the priorities, you rely on that market input, you rely on that market feedback to set those priorities.
And Cassidy, I was kind of interested from your viewpoint too, just working within a specific team, kind of how you guys drive alignment.
Sure. I would say 99% of that is really driven by having a strong kind of mission. So knowing what you're hoping to fix in the market and knowing, again, what the issue is in the market, what you're trying to solve, but also kind of what the broader purpose is of that will really help drive product vision, not just across the next quarter or the next few quarters, but the next year, the next 5 years, what have you. In terms of getting everyone aligned around that, as long as everyone buys into that mission, which hopefully they do if they're working with you, that's, I'd say, the majority of the battle. Other than that, just a better understanding specific customer concerns. A lot of times we'll get customers, and it's great to hear their feedback directly, what they're struggling with, both in the market with alternative softwares or alternative products, but also with our product itself.
And then I was curious too, how do you then decide what are the right things to build from there?
Well, I know one of the things that we like to use at Pragmatic Marketing is a tool that we call the strategy matrix. And the strategy matrix really builds upon what we've learned from the market. So what we've heard the other individuals say already this morning. And then it really starts to help you dial in by answering 2 key questions. What are you going to build? And who are you trying to delight with that thing that you're building? And then you want to start to think a little bit about how you can categorize those 2 questions. So are you going to do add-ons to existing products? Are you going to go get new options to existing products? Are you going to develop entirely new products or new platforms? And are you building those things to go after or just keep your existing customers happy, go after competitors' customers? Are you trying to find entirely new customers or entirely new market segments to penetrate? So if you can really focus in on getting clarity on those 2 questions, who you're going to delight and what you're going to build to please them, you really can use that to start to create that strategic alignment and that prioritization of what you're going to do for the things that you choose to build and where you spend your time.
Okay. And Heysoos, do you have anything to add onto that?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I love, and this is more sort of like a very practical thing that you can do as a product manager, is to help align and figure out what the right thing to build is prototyping and testing. So I can't stress the importance of prototyping and testing enough. I really feel it's almost like a product manager's secret weapon. I'll often think of it as like the fastest way to understand what users truly want and need. Quick story. So when I was when I joined Zazzle, it was my first job out of college, and I joined as sort of like a product manager. And the team, the engineering team, the design team was incredibly talented. And so I often found myself trying to compete with them intellectually on things that they were sort of, that was their craft, like on the technical components of it. And what I quickly realized is that, one, I couldn't compete with them because that's sort of what their craft was, right? That's what they had been spending their entire life doing. But the other thing I learned really quickly was that the way to level the playing field and the value that I brought was knowing the users and the customers better than anybody else. And one way that I could do that was by really quickly and crudely developing prototypes and sketches that I could test with users, and getting a better and deeper understanding of the users even before I took any of that to my designers and developers. So that was just like one really easy way that anybody can do it. It doesn't have to be like really brilliant. I would say that if you are a product manager, it is very valuable to have a skill set like that to be able to really quickly sketch concepts and test them with users and iterate very quickly. So yeah, that's one really practical way to really figure out what to build and what is the right thing to build.
And so then would the prototyping kind of take place after you've gone through something like the strategy matrix?
For sure, I couldn't agree more with it. And I like the fact that you refer to it, Heysoos, as a secret weapon. We can sit around all day long inside our four walls of our business and theorize what we think is going to be really well received in the marketplace. But what we think at the end of the day doesn't really matter. What really matters is what our market thinks. And the only way to find that out is to actually take the things that we're building out into the market and see what the market's reaction is. And I completely agree that I would much rather find that out along the way by doing a lot of acid testing and a lot of prototyping, doing it early, doing it often. So if we know that we're off track, we definitely get that early indicator much sooner rather than later. And then by the time we show up to the market, it should pretty much be a foregone conclusion that the market's going to like what we've built for them, and we've greatly reduced our risk to the organization. So 100%, we can theorize what we think is the right thing to do, but we got to go out and test that on the market because they're really going to be the final arbiter whether or not we're doing the actual right things.
Yep.
And Cassidy, too, I'd love to hear your input. I know that you talk about that product manager shouldn't be so in love with their process that they're not afraid to kind of change gears.
Yeah, absolutely. At least I feel like as a product manager, you should never really fall in love with the process, just kind of whatever works, and that's always going to vary from team to team, and will vary also across time for each team. So just being flexible with that. But I agree with what everyone said so far. I think prototyping is, a secret weapon is a great way of putting it. It's absolutely vital. And when you can prototype things, you should, and kind of get them out there, especially to passionate customers that you're already working closely with, or other members of the market in general. In terms of kind of circling back to the original question of how do you choose the right thing to build, I'm also a big fan of helping people understand that there is sort of a set bandwidth for how much you can build. So getting kind of buy-in from other groups outside of product and dev and helping people understand you have finite resources can be really helpful. A friend of mine, actually, who's also a PM, introduced me to a process that Pandora uses, and they'll kind of actually quarter to quarter bid on products that they want to buy. So they give them sort of a fictional amount of money, and they put all their product ideas up on the board. And then after they're all up on the board, they go and kind of bid on them. And it's a great way for everyone in the organization to see how amazing all these ideas are and kind of where the product could go, but then also what is reasonable for us to build in the next quarter and what we really should be focusing on. And a lot of times ideas that people came up with that they thought were make or break, have to be done right now, they don't even bid on. So it's a good way of getting people to kind of understand the kind of constraints and frustrations that I think PMs experience every day.
I was curious too, just within, because you've worked within some really large corporations, and then Heysoos, you obviously work with more startups. Does the rate at which you can prototype or that whole process, is it slower going? Are there more challenges within a large structure?
Yeah, I mean, obviously larger organizations need to be more structured to manage the breadth and depth and the scope of the magnitude of an organization. You'll find pockets of high velocity within large organizations, but there definitely has a higher tendency towards more rigor in process following than you will in a small startup. A lot of that has to do with scale. Startups, by definition, are small, nimble organizations that can move very, very quickly because often they just don't have a lot of people. This is where we'll oftentimes see organizations struggle if they get a lot of success in that version 1.0 product, and then that version 2.0 product maybe falls a little flat, because as they try to scale and retain that nimbleness, even though I'm not sure that's a word, it's hard to do. And so that's really always that struggle that you find in organizations is how do we stay nimble, how do we have velocity, how do we stay quick, and also engender processes that are going to enable us to scale.
Yeah, just to add to that, so at Tallwave we have the unique perspective that we work with a lot of startups. So obviously startups, one of their core competencies is speed and decision making, and one of the things that prevents bigger companies, so we work with bigger companies as well, and what we find is that one of the things that keeps them from moving as quickly is decision making, the pace at which they can make decisions. The nice thing about prototyping and testing is that in a lot of ways, it equalizes that. So it is a bit of a culture shift. So you have to be able to get the team internally at large organizations to all agree that they're going to be sort of bound by time constraints, and they are going to have to make decisions very quickly. But you can get them to do that by introducing things like prototyping and testing, where you are taking a more objective view on what the market is telling you and making decisions based on that, rather than just like having to drive consensus across the entire team based on a bunch of assumptions that are all very varied. So prototyping and testing, even at large organizations, is an equalizer and helps companies make decisions much faster, and move much faster.
Definitely. And we did get a question in the chat, and I just want to remind everybody too, if you do have a question, you can either tweet it at Tallwave or just post it directly in the Hangout. So this one comes from Erin. She was curious, what role do product managers play in how business needs like monetization or revenue growth are accounted for in product development?
I mean, I'll tell you at Pragmatic Marketing, our philosophy is that the product team really should act as the CEO of their products. And at the end of the day, we can build cool things to build cool things, but there has to be a return on that investment to the business. Even if you're a not-for-profit organization, there has to be some sort of return to why that justifies why you're spending your time, your money, and your resources in the way that you are. So we have a full expectation that the product team leaders are going to be those individuals who have clarity of understanding as to what's contributing to, so driving revenue, driving growth for their product lines, as well as the flip side of that, which is what's detracting from the growth of your product line. Are you producing product very, very quickly, but it's not very clean product? It has a lot of bugs, therefore it's driving a lot of calls in the support group. That's not a really great outcome either. So we really want product managers to have that eye for not only what's contributing to the business for the products that they own and lead, but also how those products might be detracting from the overall contract. Okay. I'll try to get my face in that same position.
Okay, I think we're back.
Okay.
Gotta love technology when it works.
That was probably my best answer for the day, too.
I think you got it in right before it died there.
Man.
So I was curious, kind of jumping back to that question, did you, Heysoos or Cassidy, have anything to piggyback on there?
I forgot the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. What role do product managers play in how businesses or how business needs like monetization or revenue growth are accounted for in product development?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what was said that product managers have that line of responsibility as well. It's I think early on, like, so for example, um, I'll go back to my example at Zazzle. So at Zazzle, each of us, there were several. We had several product managers, and we had one product. So those for those unfamiliar with Zazzle, it's an online marketplace for custom on-demand products. And so we have a community of sellers, and then we have people that go to the website and purchase products, and then we have a bunch of back then we had a bunch of products that we were launching into the market. And so we had 3 different product managers. We had one that was on the seller side, one that was on the buyer side, and then one that was on the product development and launch side. And each one of those product managers had outcomes and had metrics that they had to drive to, and one of those was, was monetization metrics, like how much, on the buyer side, it's easy. It's like how many purchases are being made, like what is the average cart size, like those types of things. But then also on the seller side, it was a different set of metrics, but they also tied to revenue and contributed directly to how well the company's bottom line was doing. So product managers have that responsibility. You can't decouple product from revenue and monetization.
Okay. Well, we got to hear part of that. We keep dropping out here.
Oh man, I think we lost him again. Heysoos was just going to jump in as well.
Yeah, just go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's pretty much impossible to separate the PM role from the growth of a business in general, which 90% of the time includes monetization or revenue growth. If you are a pre-money startup, as they lovingly call it these days, sometimes that can also just be, user growth in general. But you should always be aware of, if your company's OKRs, you should always be aware of OKRs or just general goals across the company. And
Yeah.
Building a product just to have it should never be something that happens. But yeah. I would be shocked if that's actually the case with anyone, really.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm not sure if Beth is back yet, but maybe we can jump into the next question. So one of the next questions was, how do you keep continuity in the midst of competing requests? And have you done this? Have you done this specifically, Cassidy, or do you have any tricks or recommendations on how you might sort of keep continuity in your team, in the process, in your progress when you have a bunch of competing requests?
I think this all ties back into kind of everyone being aware, and I communicate and then over-communicate. Sometimes people chagrin, just to kind of where the company is hoping to grow to in the next year, 5 years, what have you. So as long as you have a really strong mission, then keeping these requests kind of prioritized roughly shouldn't hopefully be that challenging. It can be hard in the face of someone who seems to be yelling the loudest to kind of let them know, hey, what you want actually isn't really what anyone else wants right now. But keeping in mind that kind of strong, broad mission can help keep things in priority. How about you?
Yeah, so I'll give like a very practical thing that you can do, because I hear this a lot, right? I mean, there's always going to be customers that are going to be yelling for new feature requests, and they're going to be very different across the board. And one of the things that I find helpful or useful is to get to the root of some of these requests. So asking why people are asking for a particular feature is often more important. So like the why or the underlying reason that they're asking for certain things is often more important than the actual feature, because you might already be solving for that need in your product roadmap, or you might have similar users that are asking for different features, but their underlying need is the same. And so in a lot of ways, like, you can start to consolidate some of these requests, even though they're different feature requests. You can start to consolidate based on the needs that they're looking to solve with those features. So just understanding what that underlying need is and the reason that they're asking for certain feature requests, I think is really critical. And you can do that by just talking to them. You can, if you have people that are requesting certain features, just get on a call with them and find out what is it that is causing issues for them. Why are they asking for this? Like, what is the problem that they're looking to solve? And really quickly, within like 5, 10, 15 minutes, you can find out what the underlying cause is for that. And you can make better decisions as a product manager based on that.
Absolutely. And just to jump in on that, better understanding the customer's workflow. Sometimes you might already have a feature or functionality that fixes what they're trying to solve, and they just don't know it.
Yeah.
And that can be
Yeah.
a UI issue. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Hey, Heysoos and Cassidy, this is Kirsten. You guys can hear us now, right?
Yeah.
We like to say we're not in the business of building products. We're in the business of continuous problem solving for our market. I'm less interested in knowing what features I need to prioritize than what problems I need to prioritize.
Yeah.
And if we can bring it exactly like you guys are saying, if we can bring it up to that problem level discussion, all of a sudden we get buckets of big problems that need to be solved versus individual requests. And that can really start to help to throttle that prioritization.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another thing I find that helps do is help motivate the team, because, like, say for example, like, designers and developers are naturally problem solvers as well, and if you're just giving them, these are the features that need to be built and designed, that's not that interesting. But if you're giving them a set of problems that need to be solved for your users or your customers, then they can really get into the work, right? They can really get into being creative about how they're going to solve it using their skill sets. And so that is, I've found, just getting to that level of needs versus features is a really compelling way to motivate your team internally.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of this, there's a great question in the chat that has to do with more agile development. Just within that approach, how do product managers align and kind of the workload with some of the user feedback and just with that sort of iterative approach?
If you think about what Heysoos just said, where we want to focus on building solutions to groups of problems, this can really start to help particularly in an agile setting, because you get more impactful releases if you build 100% of something versus 70% of everything. And so if we have a real abundance of clarity and understanding of a problem that's solved, now we have abundance and clarity of understanding of the work that should be put into our sprints and the work that we want to have as a byproduct of those sprint cycles. And now all of a sudden we're rallying around a central theme or a central cause based on what that market problem is that we need to solve. And so if we can get that clarity and we can have thematic bundles of problems that need to be solved, the analogy that I like to use is when Google first came out with maps, they didn't give us a little bit of walking, a little bit of driving, and a little bit of bicycling. They solved for being able to do driving directions first. Only once was that solved did they start to add the other problem buckets on there. That's how we all ended up getting 100% of some sort of feature set. And so if we can start to get that level of specificity and target, that really starts to feed the agile machine, and that really starts to drive that velocity that we can start to get out of our sprint cycles.
That's a great point. Anything to add, Heysoos or Cassidy? Okay. We actually do have. Oh, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just piggyback off of that. I love the idea of themes as releases. I always talk about it as like packaging your releases. So all I mean by that is like almost like give it a name, because it's a lot easier to understand throughout the organization that you're launching this like release is all aimed at solving this particular problem for these particular users, and it's going to have an impact to the business in this like very tangible way. That's like a bit abstract, right? But yeah, like having like a thematic approach to releases or a packaged approach to releases, it just drives a lot of clarity throughout the organization.
And there were a couple other questions in the chat that I wanted to address too. So do you have a strategy for getting to the pain point that they're trying to address from a feature request that they give you? Do you want to tackle that one?
Sure, I was going to let Cassidy tackle it, or.
Sure. Yeah, I think generally what we do is, if we can, hopefully get on a call with the customer and just kind of talk through their existing workflow and what they're hoping to get out of the feature request if it isn't really specific. So, for example, this is a dumb example, but this, button has to be green. Okay, well, why does it have to be green? Oh, because the majority of our users are colorblind and they can't see the button. Understanding their pain point and understanding their existing workflows 99% of the time will give you the answer to how they came to the specific feature they're requesting, and will also help you kind of collect that problem and communicate it back to the team so that you can also come up with alternative resolutions to that problem.
That's a great point.
I mean, ideally, we spend our energy on the things that we see most prevalent amongst our buyers and users, so the things that occur the most frequently. So, two data points that can really help with that prioritization as well is if you understand how frequently something is occurring, so we target doing stuff for the things that are occurring the most frequently. And then we also want to understand impact. So if we don't solve this problem, how impactful is that? Do really bad things happen? Do just kind of sort of bad things happen? And if we can couple those two pieces of information with those themes that we're targeting, it can really start to float to the top, the things that occur most often and the things that have the biggest pain point as they occur, because that's really where we want to, it's kind of what Cassidy said at the start of today's webinar, which was, we can't do everything. This is really about picking how to spend our time. And if we have an understanding of the things that occur most frequently and are the most impactful, now we can spend those very limited resources that we have in a really prudent way.
Yeah. And then this also came from the chat too, but kind of along these same lines, when there is a product feature that you really believe in that will really drive the product or the business forward, how do you push back on that if you're getting a lot of, I guess, pushback on you too? Heysoos, do you want to take that one?
So if you have a product, if you have a feature that you're really passionate internally about and that you have a strong belief around, but you're getting pushback from the market, from the customers, is that kind of the question?
More, I think, pushback internally from maybe the rest of the team or the C-suite.
Right.
Put you on the spot there.
No, that's a good. That's a really good question. I think there is no real. That one's a tough one because I think that one's something that we've probably all experienced, right? I think product managers are driving the vision of the product, but then also that's within the context of the larger company, and so the CEO. If there's any disagreement there, that's challenging. One of the things that I've found, and this is going to be sort of a reoccurring theme that you'll hear from me, is getting some objective feedback from users about so testing and validating things that you're looking to build ahead of actually even approaching the CEO or approaching your team that you want to do this, right? So there's a lot of validation that you could do. So like if I have a feature that I think is going to be really impactful, there's a lot of prototyping and testing and validating that I could do of that feature with users well ahead of actually taking that case to anybody, whether it's the CEO or my team internally, but sort of equipping yourself with some of that validation that's coming from your customers themselves, I think is a really compelling way to do that.
Mm-hmm. And then, when you have sort of maybe customers that have some really disruptive demands, how do you deal with them to kind of minimize the disruptive impact, especially if that user is threatening to stop using the product or stop testing it?
Oh, that's funny. That's a funny question. Um, I'll start it. I think you have to ask yourself, how important are they? So, I say this jokingly, but I'm actually pretty serious. Do those users or do those customers carry clout in your community? Do they represent a big portion of your revenue? That's a common thing that you see across, like, say, enterprise, like startups, is that they'll land one big gorilla client and then become sort of a slave to that client because they represent such a big portion of their revenue, right? So I think the first thing is to understand how important are these customers or are these users across your base. And if they're really important, then you probably want to answer their demands. First of all, I mean, you want to sort of step back and you want to get into a position where you're not so you're not in that position. So, do early on so is there any enterprise startup PMs that are on the line? I think one thing that's important is early on trying to diversify your customer base, so that you don't get in a position where you have one client that's, say, 50 or 40% of your revenue. So it's easier said than done because, if you have a big gorilla that's knocking at your door and they want to sign with you, then it's hard to turn them down. But, if you can sort of at least be cognizant of that issue early on, I think it's a really good thing. If the customers are not that important, if they're really just sort of like they're very vocal, but they're not actually all that important, they're not that influential in your community, or they don't represent a big portion of your revenue, I think you can still have a conversation with them and understand them or empathize with them. And a lot of times, just having that conversation and listening to them will appease a lot of their issues. I mean, that's one thing that in my two experiences working directly as a product manager, but first when I was at Zazzle and I was working with sellers, for example, they were very, very vocal because their livelihood depended on Zazzle and how well we were able to help them make money and sell products. And then the other instance, I was working with doctors, and doctors are very vocal. So I found both times, just having a conversation and empathizing with them and listening to their, a lot of times it was just a lot of complaining, and it was one-sided. It was one way, them telling me what they didn't like about the product, and me just sort of listening and saying, yeah, that's, I understand. A lot of times that was enough to sort of, to appease them. So, those are two ways that you can deal with it.
I mean, there are such things as good customers and bad customers. And I don't mean that in a judgmental phraseology sense. I mean in the sense that those organizations that do contribute to the business in a positive net result sort of way, and then there's those that sometimes actually are more expensive to keep and maintain than the business that they actually represent. Ideally, I completely agree with Heysoos in that ideally we don't find ourselves in this position to start with because we have made a concerted effort to go out and build solutions for markets full of customers versus one customer at a time. Because building things for one customer at a time just simply isn't scalable. And so even as a startup, if you get that really big customer, you better hope that there's lots more of that really big customer so you don't find yourself in a situation where you're building for one individual or one organization at a time, because that is a recipe for failure. It cannot scale. And so that's oftentimes we make those decisions because we get a big RFP and we can do 50% of the functionality that they're asking for, and we promise to do the other 50%, but it doesn't align with our business at all, an RFP being a request for proposal, when in reality we should have walked away from that business, and we should have put our energy towards things that would be represent a better return for the company. So if that happens, you do have to take a really hard look at it and say, is this something that we should continue to do? Does it scale for our business? Is it the right thing? Is it good business?
Mm-hmm. And Cassidy, is there anything that you wanted to add on that note?
No, I mean, you guys killed it, but I completely agree. I mean, a lot of being a good product manager and is just kind of knowing what your product does and what your product doesn't do, and stepping back sometimes and knowing that you're not going to check 99 out of 100 boxes of the RFP every time, but yeah, being able to kind of have that support also from the rest of the company to say, yes, we do this and this is great, but no, we don't do this. Here's some potential workarounds, but it's not, that's okay too.
Perfect. And then we do have some questions in the chat that I'll address next, but wanted to tackle this one. It's pretty interesting, but wanted to know from you guys what kind of advice you might have for product managers who are looking to take a product to market but are maybe struggling with how to manage the various stakeholders. Heysoos, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can, unless somebody else wants to jump in on that one.
Maybe Cassidy.
Cassidy?
Yeah.
Cassidy.
I don't have anything super new to add. I mean, again, just emphasis on understanding what your OKRs are across the company, especially for that product particularly. I've taken a couple of products to market, and it can be really challenging when people don't agree what they're hoping to accomplish. So getting people to agree, whether it's locking them in the room or however, to agree on kind of what they're hoping to accomplish, whether it's specific metrics of user growth or revenue, or improving the product to help grow towards something else, can really be helpful. It's also kind of going back to that strategy of introducing problems and helping people figure out the solution together rather than kind of working towards an end goal. I'd say with that, it's also, if you ideally have a product marketing team, that's the time to become best friends with your product marketing team. So really figuring out when and how you can effectively communicate with your audience, both current and ideally future, whether or not you're doing that appropriately, and whether or not you should be doing it more and more often.
That's great.
Yeah, to piggyback off of some of that, I think it really comes down to for me, it comes down to visibility and communication. So as a PM, you're doing a lot of things, right? But it's one, you're setting the product vision, you're prioritizing and executing on that, like the evolution of the product, and then you're managing expectations across the board with key stakeholders. So in the time of releases, it's amazing just how much good visibility and communication into the roadmap and what is going to be launched can do for stakeholders, because ultimately they just need to build their plans and they just need to be able to do their jobs, and they can't do that unless they have visibility into what's being launched. So whether that's like a sales team that needs to know what features are coming down the pipeline so they can communicate that to prospects and potential clients, or whether it's the client management team that needs to know the same thing so that they can voice that, new features or new things that the product is able to do to their existing customers, or whether it's operations, right? So they can adjust how their operational workflows are going to be based on these new things that are coming down the pipeline. All those things the product manager doesn't have to do, right? But they need to provide that visibility so that those teams can then go and execute their plans and get their teams ready for whatever's coming down the pipeline. So just visibility and communication when you're launching new sets of features, whether they be releases or an entirely new product, is really critical.
Well, and I think it's also the right amount of information at the right time with all of those audiences. Not everybody needs to know everything all the time, and we all know things change. Especially if you're dealing with a legacy product or an existing product, there's a lot of times a developer will open up the code in that product and find, rogue strings of code that they didn't know were there, and that inhibits our ability to get something done that we thought we were going to be able to get done. So we don't have to, things we haven't even started coding yet, where we don't have designs, we don't necessarily have specifications, maybe those aren't appropriate to start sharing internally with a broader audience. Maybe as we get closer to things that are actually going to be that potentially shippable, that potentially sellable, that potentially demoable, whatever your preferred terminology is, that's when we start to share that with wider audiences. Otherwise, we end up becoming, telling everybody and then retelling everybody ends up being our full-time jobs, and we don't actually get the chance to build stuff.
We're getting a lot of great questions in the chat, so I want to take a couple minutes to address a few of them. One of them was on what kind of KPIs can you use to hold product and engineering teams accountable? Cassidy, from your experience just working within that setting, do you guys have any set kind of KPIs that you go to?
Not really set necessarily. It kind of varies based on the product feature, but I will say, overall as a company, we obviously look to kind of user stickiness and user engagement across our features. So if user engagement all of a sudden drops if we launch a new improvement, we'll immediately look into why is that or what's happening. Yeah, I would say that this is probably outside of KPIs, but for looking at something to hold people responsible across the company, velocity, if we practice Agile, Scrum can be a good way of looking at that. So communicating out to people kind of expectations of what you'll get done within a sprint cycle, and kind of also keeping yourselves accountable for, if we didn't hit our typical velocity, why was that? What can we fix or improve next time within our sprint cycles to make that better?
Mm-hmm. And then just kind of piggybacking off of the previous question with communicating to stakeholders, and maybe we address this, but I don't know if there's a way to get a little more granular. They were wondering, when you are dealing with stakeholders that have varying degrees of, I guess, stubbornness or tolerances, are there any approaches that you can take to kind of directly communicate or assuage those stakeholders?
I think what's helpful is if you can agree upon a set of artifacts that you're going to use as your communication vehicle. So we're going to use, for example, maybe the roadmap to share general goals, themes, a predictive indicator of the direction that we're headed. That could be something that's very widely used in the organization and should be widely used in the organization so everybody sees the vision or the direction that we're marching towards. Once you start to actually take work and be able to put together a specific release plan, so you're starting to dial in what's going to be delivered when you make a decision about how much you're going to put in any given release, that's appropriate to start bringing in and sharing the release plan with maybe the services team, the support team, the operations team, because they have to get ready to start catching that release when it hits the market. They have to be prepared to take calls the day that it releases. And maybe we start including our marketing organization or our sales organization during that process as well, so they can start creating their messaging, their sales tools. It's really about what's the right moment in time to share the right amount of information that gets people in the position to best do their work without having to do rework because we prematurely shared information. And so it's really not about hiding information, it's about creating velocity by optimizing everybody's time. And that's really one of the great things about thinking in an agile way for your business is we can, really what I loved about what Heysoos has been talking about, prototyping and testing, we can do that with every facet of our business, not just our products. We can do that with our marketing messaging, our sales tools. And so if we can put a construct in place and we can put agreed upon artifacts in place that are going to help govern that dialogue, all of a sudden we now start moving everybody together much more quickly, and our end product is much higher quality overall when we put it in the market.
I'm going to try to answer that question specifically that was just asked, which is, how do you handle really, really vocal internal stakeholders who are pretty disruptive or demanding in things that they're asking for? And I'm going to sort of answer it from sort of experience that I have working with like an enterprise sales team into hospitals and doctors' offices, right? And so, you have all these reps out there, and I don't know if this is going to answer it, but I'm going to answer it in the way that I sort of know, is that you're often going to get a lot of sales reps who are going to be different levels of demanding and vocal about what features are going to help them close a deal, for example. And what I did in that situation was I worked with a VP of sales to really get on the same page that every single, if there's going to be a request that's going to come in from the sales team, that there has to be some business case that's made for that particular request, so that they're not just coming in ad hoc, and that they're not just requests that are sort of like out of nowhere with just all these like built-in assumptions about what kind of revenue it's going to drive, but that there is a business case around each of these things, so that can help me prioritize and help me serve the greater sales team, not just one particular person. And getting on the same page with the VP of sales and like whoever is sort of in that role, or the key leaders on the sales team is really critical in making sure that they are on the same page, that this is kind of how it's going to work.
Mm-hmm. And kind of dovetailing with that, and you kind of addressed this, but we're talking more about stakeholders as being some of the higher ups, but what about just within your team? How do you kind of manage the needs of the folks within your team to ensure that they're all working towards the same goal and towards the best interests of the customer and the company? Cassidy, do you want to tackle that one?
Totally. I overly communicate to the point of probably annoyance with my team, but I like to check in with everyone, making sure, from off the bat, everyone is on board with the company mission. Hopefully they are, because they're sitting next to you every day. But outside of that, just helping, everyone understand, what are the problems your customers are facing. If, the QA team, they're in the product every day, what are the problems that they see they're facing? Making sure everyone's kind of aware of that on the broader level. And on the day-to-day level, are there things that they're dealing with that you can help them fix or make easier? Are there things in their process that don't work? Try something else. Are there communication issues within the team you can help massage or how to get people together? I find that product is a position where you kind of have to play therapist a little bit every now and then. So getting people communicating and making sure that your team is on board with everything you're doing is really important.
That's perfect. And anything to add, Kirsten?
No, I think they hit it.
And then, are there any kind of leaders or product teams that you guys follow closely that you might recommend to other fellow product managers on this Hangout?
Yeah, I can jump in first if you guys don't mind. I really like Jared Spool is actually a UX guy, but he's extremely well known in the industry, and I love everything that he has to say. He has some really smart ideas of kind of breaking up existing processes that people tend to rely on sometimes too heavily. And he writes regularly, posts on LinkedIn, I think, as well. So he's a good one to follow. Our company also has a lot of similarities with Box, so I tend to check in with Aaron Levy, who both has a hilarious Twitter and also does a lot of different Q&As and live conferences. So whatever he's getting into, usually I'll follow up with him. I know recently I think we did a Product Hunt live chat, which is also really good. Mind the Product also does a really fabulous newsletter. I found if anyone, they really send out Medium posts, articles, videos that are the most relevant, the most I've seen. And that's about it. Other than that, I really love Medium. Their release notes are quirky and adorable, and I just think that's great. Being able to infect something that has, some might see minuscule as release notes with joy is pretty nice.
Heysoos, are there any that you kind of follow?
Yeah, there's a couple of teams that I follow that I love. Slack is one team that is just killing it right now, and their product team is is really strong, and the thing that I love about them in particular is that their personality sort of shines through the product. So they're one of the few companies that understand the importance of personality in the application itself, and how that is a way to drive your culture, how that's a way to drive your brand. And so I think they just get it. They understand it really well. That's one of the things that we try to incorporate at Tallwave. We try to incorporate those, that level of branding within the app, that personality within the brand, within the app, with the companies that we work with. And Slack is they just kill it. Them and Mailchimp do a really good job of that. In terms of like individuals, there's a couple of people that I follow. Ken Norton is ex-Google PM, pretty well-known product manager, writes a lot, actually just launched a newsletter about 2 weeks ago, and just has really good content on all subjects, product management. Josh Ellman is an old colleague of mine at Zazzle. He's a partner now at Greylock. He talks a lot about, his focus is more on consumer applications that leverage big platforms like Facebook and Twitter, but he's really strong on that consumer side. So if you're a PM on the consumer side and you don't follow Josh Ellman, you definitely should.
Kirsten.
So some of my colleagues, fellow instructors at Pragmatic Marketing, have blogs, and I obviously have a bias, but I do love to read their blogs. So John Gatrell, Paul Young, and Dave Daniels all have product-related blogs or launch blogs related to product launches. And then we've got a instructor whose specialty is pricing, Mark Stiving, and he does some really great blogs on pricing as well. Product Camp, productcamp.org is a great source of information, and Mind the Product is one that I'm a fan of as well.
Yeah, it's a great site. I know we've only got a couple more minutes left, but I did want to take one last question from the chat, and then the others we can take down and put together a blog post and get some of these folks to provide answers for them. But when you're on a team that maybe you have experience working within that particular product, but you're newer to the team, how do you, I guess, what is the product manager's role in that product's life cycle when they're getting pushback from whether it's other team members or stakeholders who may not be as experienced as you working in that particular product, but they've been with the company for a little bit longer? What is the product manager's role at that point to kind of push back? Cassidy, do you have any thoughts on that one?
That's tricky, because I'm assuming if they've been with the company longer, they potentially are more senior, even if they haven't been with your product or product group necessarily. Yeah, I mean, I would think I'd learn more about their experience, kind of depending on where they're from in the company, whether it's on the more sales side or marketing side or customer service side or anywhere in between is always helpful. And again, I would say kind of going back to shared OKRs or shared kind of company goals really help people understand, why certain features are prioritized over other features, or why, as we spoke about earlier, other sort of problem themes are prioritized over other problem themes. But then again, going back to what I think Kirsten said earlier, having kind of these defined kind of ways of talking about the success of different features and how you prioritize these things will always be helpful. So if you agree as a team that certain metrics are kind of what you want to use to measure the success of a feature or the product overall, kind of having those talking points that are previously agreed upon will be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe take them for a beer. Take him or her for a beer.
When in doubt, take them for a beer. One last question to just wrap things up. How do you balance the needs of perfectionists on the team versus maybe the business stakeholders like the CEOs who want to always push new features out faster?
I'm going to go back to where we started the day with Heysoos, talking about prototyping. There is the point of diminishing returns. we can over-engineer our products. There is a point where it's good enough, and good enough is actually what the market wants, and we should stop. And the incremental value of those final little tweaks and twists just doesn't have the return on that investment. It's not a good use of our resources as a business, and that's where that early, often prototype acid test loop is so critical, because that will be instantaneous feedback that we should be getting. And if we do that well and we do that right, it should be pretty self-evident when we hit that mark. And again, it's not really what we think inside the building. It's not whether or not our executive team are perfectionists. It's what the market wants from us, because that's what we're building for. We're not building for ourselves. We're building for the people who we're trying to please in the market. And so let's go find out what's pleasing to them, and then that's when it should be enough.
Anything to add on to that, Cassidy or Heysoos?
I completely agree. On both sides, you don't want to over-engineer something and keep something that could be extremely useful to a customer, keep that away from them. On the flip side, you don't want to push out something that people immediately hate because you didn't take enough time to make it good. So having both sides to understand that and really refining and ironing out your MVP, I would say, well before you get into that kind of discussion is helpful. Having both sides agree on what truly MVP is and what MVP is a more viable product, to make sure that is agreed upon by all parties before it's pushed out the door is helpful. So otherwise it can just kind of snowball.
Yeah, and just one last thing, Beth, if I still have time, is that you're not going to, before you launch, you're not going to be able to learn everything about new features or new products that you're launching. And so getting your team into the mindset that there's still going to be a lot of learning that is going to be done once you launch a product, I think is really helpful, because it lets everybody say, okay, 80%, we're going to build 80% of what we know and believe based on the prototyping and the testing that we've done to this point. We're going to build it, we're going to launch, and then 20% is still going to be us learning. So the users are going to tell us, based on their behavior, based on how they use the product, whether or not that last 20% is right or wrong. And then based on that, we can then make tweaks or changes, rather than try to guess and design or develop for that last 20%. Doing that after users have actually used it and you can see what their actual behavior is, I think is really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I think, we're officially, we're 2 minutes over, but thank you, Kirsten and Heysoos and Cassidy, for joining in on the Hangout, and for everybody else who tuned in. We got a lot of really great questions, so like I said, we'll take some of those and answer them in a blog post, so be on the lookout for that. And thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.